Hey guys, welcome back to another video. So for today's sketchbook session, I think it's similar to last week where I kind of have two different sessions going on for today's sketchbook, I guess like spreads for today. So the majority, I think like 2/3 of the video will be dedicated to a water-based marker and ballpoint pen spread, while the last little bit of the video will probably be, I think it's just a time-lapse version of some flowers that I did, and I wasn't sure if I was going to include them in today's video, but I decided to just because it kind of relates to today's session anyways. So as I mentioned earlier, we are doing another water-based marker spread. So to start off, I am going to be using the Pilot Color ENO in the color red to do the kind of like generic or general sketch for the character that I'm drawing today, which happens to be my OC Kaisen. So apologies if you guys are only gonna see Kaisen like for a lot of the videos, just like whenever I'm doodling or sketching or anything OC related, just because I'm trying to get a good grasp of his design and like a lot of the things that I want to work with in terms of his character. So I'm probably going to be doodling and drawing him quite a bit. So today is no exception. So while I'm kind of working on the sketch for the next few minutes, I kind of want to talk about a project that I always wanted to work on for the last probably a year or two, I think, or a few years, but I've always put it off, and I've kind of worked on it here and there, or at least like the concept of it. So I might want to push forward and kind of actually start to properly work on it, but it requires a little bit more research probably on my end. So I'm thinking of buying some botany and flower books or anything of that sort so I can do a little bit more brushing up on the research. But the thing that I wanted to talk about is that in previous sketchbooks and also like on my iPad and on like things that I've doodled in the past, I've always wanted to make like a zine, a flower zine in particular, but I wanted to include like OC illustrations, or I'm gonna see if I can find the sketchbook that has these drawings. But I used to draw flowers in my sketchbook, and on the side would have like little bits of commentary, and I think I used to use like Wanu with a sprout on his head to kind of like explain things, or I used to use like little chibi versions of Masaki to do that. And now that I have Kaisen and Masaki and probably Moriko as well, who's my other OC, or Riko, and I kind of want to use them for this project as well, because Kaisen and Riko kind of fills up that particular space where I was like, oh, do I want to make up OCs for this? And for the most part, I always wanted OCs that had more of a darker, or I guess like more like dark hair, but then I could fiddle around with very simple outfits for their aesthetic so that they can fit nicely with a lot of different flowers, because I feel like either going white or going black, it can complement a lot of the color schemes of flowers and bouquets and like foliage and stuff a little bit easier, rather than, I guess like Masaki wouldn't be too bad since he has a very earthy palette anyway sometimes, but I kind of wanted to expand who I was going to draw for that zine, because I wanted to do full illustrations of my OCs alongside with the flowers, either for bouquets or different kind of illustrations in general with those flowers. But I've also wanted to do is bring back the little chibis with the commentary next to the flower studies and stuff, and I think it'd be fun to do that and to have kind of like reference for the future. So I'm probably going to start working on that and doing planning. So I'm still kind of debating whether or not I'm going to purchase books physically regarding like the plant subjects, flowers, all that, botany, anything that I would like to potentially include in terms of like my research for the zine, or do I want to just maybe use my iPad as a Kindle, download some digital books to do my research that way, because it would be fun to record a lot of my research that I myself want to learn a lot about the flowers and stuff and kind of put it towards this project, but I think visually it'd be fun to have it as a zine. So I've been kind of struggling here and there with how I wanted to format it, so I'll try my best to dig up some of my old sketches, both digitally and traditionally, that I used to do for those kinds of potentially prep for those flower zines that I want to do. Maybe I'll talk a little bit more about the project later in the video, or for like a separate video once I get more details kind of solidified. But let's talk about the colors for Kaisen. So oftentimes when I'm planning out color palettes for my OCs or for Genshin characters, any characters that I want to do fan art of, if I'm stumped, I will look on Pinterest, look up color palettes to figure out what things look together, what kind of color palettes that I like, because there's some colors that I don't use often. But you can see that I was putting the Pinterest kind of boards next to my kind of swatch sheet, and there's a lot of colors that I do not have available due to the range of the markers that I have, which is not like a super big problem, but it does limit my palette a little bit in terms of contrast. So right here I was trying to pick out colors for Kaisen. So I had 4 colors potentially picked out, but I was going to use only 3 of them, which is kind of like a yellow, either that teal turquoise color, and a brown, or I was going to use yellow, the dark blue, and the brown. Now, you're going to see from this spread, and maybe from the thumbnail as well, that I did not end up using the brown. So for Kaisen's color palette, I want to say he wears majority black, and potentially I'm kind of leaning towards dark green that's very muted, or even just like a very kind of like cooler gray color for his pants, and probably just black for his shoes, but I'm not too sure exactly. And a lot of the colors in this particular marker set, which is the water-based marker Fineliners from Magicfly, they're kind of on the more vibrant side, and there's a lot of nice dark colors and a lot of mid-tone colors and a few pastel colors, but it was a little bit hard for me to find a color that like truly represents Kaisen. So when I decide and try to come up with the color palettes for my OCs, so often thinking about their eye color, their hair color, outfit, skin tone, all of that into consideration. So I feel like Kaisen and Rico have very similar color palettes in terms that it's dark hair, more leaning towards black, and then very much a dark outfit. But for Rico, I kind of like the fact that she has the lighter color eyes. She has almost an earthy tone alongside with kind of, I want to lean her towards either more brown and then earthy tones, and then the black will lean a little bit more warmer, while Kaisen is still going to be a little bit up in the air, because the last drawing that I drew of him for Valentine's Day had a lot more influence of pink, but I feel like for him, grays, blacks, and even just muted greens would fit him the best, because I kind of associate him with the certain kind of flower, which is called, I think it's called hellebore. I'm not too sure. It's like HELLEBORE, and I really like these flowers, but my favorite of these particular ones are the ones that are more dark. So they almost have like a dark black green tinge, but a little bit of that kind of like violet color, or even like a magenta, or even just brown, and it's very like vibrant in its own way. But I love the dark aesthetic, and I feel like it fits him the best in terms of like the flowers. And when I was picking flowers for like the little chibi versions that I did a sketching session of, eventually I'll finish those ones, but I kind of want to lean his color palette that way. Now, even though I said that those are the colors that I associate with Kaisen, I ended up not choosing any colors that I feel like fit him very well, but I treated it more like keeping things vibrant and keeping it with a two-tone palette, but I'm relying heavily on white and black as well. Mostly black, just because I am going to be working on inking, which you're seeing me do right here with a ballpoint pen, but I am going to try my best to block out at least like a significant amount of like the shading and stuff, with some areas where I'm going to be focusing on making it more dark and black, so that it kind of fits a little bit more almost monochromatically, rather than thinking like his entire color palette is blue and yellow, which technically, if I think about it, for my OCs, like I said, when I design my OCs, usually I like to be able to limit their colors to almost 2 colors each that represent them. So for Masaki, it's brown and teal, or brown and turquoise. And then for Sato, it's kind of, I guess, like peach, and then like a lighter turquoise gray color. I think for Koji's like kind of an exception, because his hair, I feel like, helps with the color palette that I chose, because he's kind of red and blue, but his hair has almost this dustier, I don't know how you explain it, ochre yellow color. So he's kind of more primary colors, and I think it fits him because he's my youngest OC. Then I have Akemi. So Akemi has, I don't know, I associate him because of his eye color and overall dressing, even though it's like his clothes are on the darker side. I usually pick navy blue and yellow or navy blue and orange. Then for, who else do we have? Hansuke doesn't count. He's just the cat mascot. We have Selwyn. So Selwyn is actually supposed to be yellow and kind of that purpley light blue-ish color. Not quite the same as what Kaisen has here. It's a little bit more lighter and more on the purple side, but I definitely kind of associate those colors with him. And then we have Riko or Moriko. So for her, I have black and kind of that light pale green, which I think looks really cute. And then for Kaisen, I feel like his is still up in the air because of the lack of color in his color palette, if anything. Like the most color that he has is maybe his pants and his eye color, but I kind of purposely made it that way, similar to Riko a little bit, so that majority of the color that I can include into illustrations of him are going to be heavily influenced with whatever's around him, because even though his clothing is going to be majority kind of more muted and black, I do want to draw colors from things around him so that he fits nicely into almost everything. And that's kind of what I wanted for when I was working on planning for my flower zine. And I still want an OC, maybe that's going to be majority like white clothing, but I feel like I can just put Riko and Kaisen into that, or even Maseki, and I can just fulfill what that need is for what I wanted aesthetically. So I don't think it's much of a problem. But it does make it a little bit harder for me to sketch him a little bit in this method. But I feel like for this one, like I mentioned, I'm treating it a little bit more monochromatically, where I'm chunking in the majority of the, I guess like the space, and filling in larger areas with the dark blue, just because I am going to hopefully define everything nicely with the pen. And usually I would actually pick something that's a little bit more bold in terms of the line work color, but like I mentioned, he has a lot more black, and the reason why I'm even using ballpoint pen rather than, let's say, some of my other like liquid liners. So like I have a Staedtler one with like the liquid point. I also have the, oh, I don't remember the other brand, but it's another one that I used to use quite a bit. It's just that this paper really hates drying with those particular needlepoint pens, which really sucks because I love needlepoint pens because they lack a proper point. It's kind of like one thickness throughout, but it like is able to do flat coverage if you take your time, alongside with, I don't really have to put a lot of pressure to put the ink down. It's kind of just like one and done. But for something like ballpoint pen, which is similar to, let's say, like a pencil, you can do thinner lines, thicker lines, and you can also make things significantly darker or leave things kind of scratchy and light. So there's a lot I can play around with ballpoint pen, but it does put a lot of pressure on my wrist whenever I use it, because usually when I'm using ballpoint pen, I do think I tend to make sure there's a good balance between the colors, the white of the page and the black of the ink, so that there's enough contrast for the black of the ink to kind of stand out from the page in general. So in the future, when I probably will draw Kaisen a little bit more, maybe I'll try to dig around for any of my other pens so that I can actually do full flat black inking for him. I feel like he could be fun for Inktober as well, just because his hair is kind of more wispy in the front of his face. And the reason why I'm not using the Magicfly kind of liners or like fine liners to do the black, even though there's a black in the set, I don't know if it's me or it's my brother, whoever used it before. When I was looking at the kind of like tip of the point of where the nib is, it's kind of like flattened, and the way how I ink is never like straight up and down. So maybe it's me that's the culprit, that I usually kind of ink at an angle, and if I'm inking at an angle and it's like completely flat, it makes more like scratchier lines, which makes it a little bit harder for me to get something significantly darker. So I decided that I would just try to find something else to fulfill that kind of darkness that I can get from other ink, instead of using the Magicfly one where I have to put so much pressure to kind of get that particular look that I'm looking for. So maybe I'll go back and look for some of my other fine liners or needlepoint pens that I can use in the sketchbook. And maybe I just have to be patient again and don't worry about the drying time for some of my sketches here. So initially I thought I was going to leave the entire session right there and just end the video, but earlier, before doing the voiceover, I actually spent some time to paint some stuff in my sketchbook, which happens to be more hellebore flowers because I thought it would be pretty, and I don't know, I just really wanted to paint something again. I really do love painting so much, and watercolor is just fun to play with, especially this particular set from, I think it's MeiLaing, but this set has so many pre-mixed kind of like vibrant colors, so it made it a little bit easier for me to just quickly paint in all these flowers, which, like I said, kind of has like black, a little bit of dark green. It has like a little bit of that magenta color, a little bit of blue and green, and it just can be really fun, especially the darker flowers. But I did do one that's a little bit more of that purpley violet color instead, or magenta color, just because I wanted to bring a little bit more color to the entirety of the spread. And I'm painting kind of roughly, but trying to keep in mind of where some of the forms are before we move on to inking. But then the one on the right, which is the one that I'm currently working on, I had plans of doing a gouache painting for this really simply. So I decided to just do one kind of larger flower with like a bud and a smaller, more closed off flower so that I wouldn't be too overwhelmed with painting with gouache. Because I think I've already mentioned this way too many times, my relationship with gouache is I'm still struggling with it, so I'm still gonna try my best to learn how to paint with it a little bit more efficiently and in a way that I enjoy it. But to kind of finish off these flowers on the left side, I pulled out my ballpoint pen once again and started to outline things so that it kind of pops out from the page a little bit more compared to if I just left it as washes. I feel like these bottom flowers, even though it got more messy, it kind of needed the line work a little bit more, and I didn't mind if I left the upper ones kind of as is without the ballpoint pen. I think it would have looked just as pretty, but sometimes the lines just work out, and sometimes I feel like maybe I shouldn't have put the lines in. But now we're working with gouache, so I pulled out my HIMI MIYA jelly gouache and pre-mixed a few purples so that I could try my best to color mix closely to the washes that I had laid out. So I did have a reference on my phone, but I did not follow it super closely. I was trying my best to see if I was able to block in shapes that I remembered seeing when I was initially doing my watercolor washes, and then after that I pulled back the reference so that I could take a closer look when we were going to do some of the detailing, because I just wanted to have a little bit of fun and kind of just do whatever I wanted to do for this particular session, just because gouache for me is still very intimidating, and even though I think like doing studies would be more beneficial for me, but sometimes you just have that urge to just play with the play with the paint. I don't know if I'm thinking about ink right now. I think I'm just wanting to go look for some of those needlepoint pens again, see if they work in my sketchbook, because sometimes it's a hit or miss, and it becomes really frustrating when everything just smudges underneath your hand. Maybe it's like since last year. I don't know if it's because I've been drawing a lot more, but I haven't been like staying on one piece for a very long time. Maybe I'm having a problem with patience recently, so maybe if I go back and do the inking, maybe when I start to work more with gouache, I'll learn to slow down and actually make things a little bit more deliberate and feel the need to just not go as fast when I'm working on stuff. But I definitely think I enjoyed and liked the overall look of this particular gouache piece. So it's not too shabby, it's not the greatest, but it was just kind of fun to do. So yeah, here's the flowers, and then here's the little spread of Kaisen, which doesn't really represent his color palette too much, but I don't think he has a solidified color palette at this point. But yeah, oh, I did some extra flowers, but I got too sleepy, so I didn't end up finishing them because I tend to doodle at night. But hopefully you guys enjoyed today's video, and happy Monday, and I'll talk to you guys next time in the next video. Bye!